It was the sound of my tires crunching over shattered ceramic gnomes that told me something was wrong. At first, I thought it was some kind of art installation gone rogue, a weird HOA-themed prank, maybe. But then I saw the orange cones, the freshly planted shrubs, and the big laminated sign zip-tied to a chain across my driveway. Access temporarily denied, pending HOA visual compliance review. I blinked, thinking I had parked in the wrong cul-de-sac. But no, there was my porch, my dog barking behind the window, and my mailbox now surrounded by ornamental hedges that hadn't been there yesterday. I stepped out of the car, careful not to trip over what used to be my neighbor's ceramic frog family, now smashed and buried halfway into a new flowerbed. Then she came into view, Karen, the HOA president. Clipboard in hand, massive sunglasses on even though the sun had already dipped below the hill, and that grin. That maddening, self-satisfied, Crypt Keeper-style grin. She pointed at the sign with her pen like she was revealing a winning lottery ticket. "Sorry, Neil," she said, her voice drenched in faux sympathy. "But it's not your street. It's our neighborhood." And just like that, she turned and strutted away as if she'd just delivered the final line of a courtroom drama. I stood there frozen, surrounded by potted plants I didn't order, with my own driveway blocked, and something in me snapped, not with rage, but with focus. This wasn't going to end in a shouting match. No. This was going to end with paperwork, blueprints, and a locked gate she'd never see coming. The next day, I did what any reasonable person would do. I called the HOA to get clarification, assuming this had to be a mistake. The receptionist transferred me 3 times before someone hung up. When I tried emailing, the response was a generic template that said, "All visual complaints must go through the HOA Aesthetic Review Board." I went to the next board meeting thinking surely someone would see reason. But instead, they ambushed me with a slideshow of my house taken at various angles, some of which had clearly been snapped through my windows, and they highlighted my driveway's non-conforming shape and color palette. I tried to speak, but Karen banged a gavel she absolutely did not need and said my time was up. I left the meeting to find a warning notice taped to my mailbox claiming that my dog's barking was potentially disturbing community harmony. The next morning, there were 3 more potted trees and a note that simply read, "Compliance makes the community beautiful." It wasn't about rules. It was never about rules. This was about control. I live in a modest but well-designed custom home that I helped build as an architect. My driveway, poured in slate concrete with earth-tone brick bordering, was fully compliant when I moved in. The HOA had even signed off on it 5 years ago. But Karen didn't like me. That much was clear. Ever since I helped my neighbor win an appeal to keep her solar panels up, Karen had had it out for me. Petty citations started showing up. My mailbox was too contemporary. My trash bins were visible for 17 minutes past collection time. Once, I got a violation notice for having excessive wind chime activity. That was the actual wording. But blocking my driveway? That crossed the line. I started digging, first metaphorically, then literally. I pulled the property deeds, the zoning maps, even the old HOA formation document. I found something strange in the original plat. The roads inside the neighborhood were owned collectively, but the main entrance road wasn't. It was leased through an easement agreement from a private party. And that agreement had quietly expired 8 months ago. I almost spilled my coffee when I read the footnote. Easement subject to renewal upon agreement of original developer or successor in interest. That's when I picked up the phone and called Carlos. Carlos was an old college buddy of mine turned real estate investor. He once bought an entire strip mall for fun, just because a Subway shop ticked him off with soggy bread. When I told him what was going on, he practically started packing his checkbook. I told him I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted a checkmate. He grinned. "You're speaking my language." While Carlos got to work tracing ownership of the expired easement land, I decided to test how far Karen would go. I had my contractor try to remove the potted trees. Within an hour, an HOA enforcer, yes, they actually call them that, showed up threatening a fine for unauthorized landscaping. I asked him to show me where in the bylaws it stated the HOA could plant things on private property. He simply muttered, "Karen's orders," and walked away. A few days later, Carlos called me with news. The land we needed had been split into 3 parcels. 2 were still held in a dormant LLC. The third, owned by a bank, offloaded during the last foreclosure wave. Within a week, Carlos had secured the first 2. The third required a bit more finesse, but nothing a creative offer couldn't fix. I wired the money. The property changed hands. And suddenly, the entire neighborhood's only access road legally belonged to me. Now came the fun part, quietly and legally, preparing the installation of a fully permitted entry gate. Not just any gate. This one had a keypad, camera recognition, and a management firm ready to issue passes. I didn't want to punish my neighbors, just remind them who had the real power here. And as for Karen? She'd finally have to understand what it felt like to be locked out of her own illusion of control. After all, she said it wasn't my street. Now it wasn't hers either. It was mine. And I had just ordered the key. The sun had barely risen when the rumble of delivery trucks echoed down the street like thunder announcing a storm. Residents peered out their windows, sleepy-eyed and suspicious, watching a small convoy of workers offload metal beams, concrete mixers, and a roll of black fencing taller than a grown man. No one knew what was happening, not yet, but they all had questions. At the center of the commotion stood a towering rectangular sign wrapped in brown cloth and duct tape. It was propped up beside a hole being dug directly at the neighborhood's only entrance, the same road every single homeowner relied on to get to the outside world. That road now had orange spray-painted markings leading to metal posts sunk into freshly poured concrete. Behind it all, quietly observing with a travel mug in hand and a calm smile, was me. Carlos had handled most of the logistics. The company overseeing the gate installation specialized in high-security custom entries, mostly for government buildings, remote estates, and industrial facilities. When they learned this was for a private road connected to an HOA nightmare, they offered a discount just for the entertainment value. We kept things by the book. Permits? Filed. Signage? Ordered. Access control software? Configured and branded under the LLC we set up called Sandrock Management. By mid-morning, the new road gate stood tall. Double swing, iron-forged and equipped with a license plate reader, emergency override features, and a facial recognition option that made it look like something out of a spy movie. It was elegant, brutal, and perfectly legal. Word spread fast, and within hours the emails started pouring in. At first, it was polite curiosity from neighbors. Was there construction scheduled? Road maintenance, maybe? Then came the emails with slightly more panic in their tone. "Hey Neil, just checking. Did the HOA approve some kind of gate?" And finally, full-on outrage. "Who the hell gave permission for this fortress-looking thing?" I didn't reply to any of them. Not until the cloth was pulled off the sign. At exactly noon, with the help of Carlos and a small crowd of amused contractors, I peeled away the wrapping. The sign read, "Private access, Sandrock Property Management. Permit required for entry. Violators will be towed and prosecuted." Below that was the kicker. Monthly vehicle permit fee, $125. Resident discount available upon request. That's when the shouting started. Karen herself came barreling toward the gate in her baby blue Lexus, screeching to a halt just inches from the barricade. She jumped out, red-faced and panting, and waved a crumpled HOA handbook at me like it was the U.S. Constitution. "What is this madness?" she barked. "You can't just build a gate and block people in." I sipped my coffee and gestured toward the sign. "Actually, I can. This is private land now. You said it wasn't my street, remember?" She turned purple. "You're extorting the neighborhood." "No," I said, letting the silence sit just long enough to rattle her. I'm managing traffic on my property. You're welcome to apply for a permit like everyone else. That line spread faster than I imagined. Within 24 hours, our permit portal received over 70 applications. Some were straightforward. Others were rage-fueled diatribes about how this was un-American, unethical, and ungodly. One resident submitted a request that just said, "Please tell me this is a prank." The local newspaper even caught wind of it after someone posted photos online with the caption, "HOA gets a taste of its own gates." The article headline the next day read, "Architect buys neighborhood access road in bold HOA backlash." To be fair, I wasn't heartless. Elderly residents received their passes free of charge. Those with medical needs or school transportation were prioritized. The point wasn't to profit. It was to make a statement, and oh boy, did it land. Karen's empire cracked at the seams. At the next emergency HOA board meeting, which I attended solely to hand out permit applications, people weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. They were demanding answers. "I thought you said the HOA owned everything past the post office box," yelled Mr. Hendricks, a retiree who once proudly enforced noise violations but now stood trembling with fury. "You said no one could ever block the road." Karen stammered, "We were supposed to renew the easement last year, but the vote was delayed because of landscaping priorities and, well, this is sabotage." "Or maybe," I said, leaning back in my seat and setting the packet of applications on the table, "this is just a reflection of your priorities." There was a long, tense silence before the board voted to suspend all pending landscaping fines and review Karen's authority. That same night, several of her most loyal enforcers quit the board entirely. I found out later they had all been charged for their permits like everyone else and realized just how little Karen had truly done to protect them. I didn't need to say a word. The gate said it all. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees lining the back of the cul-de-sac, I walked up to the gate just to admire it. A few cars trickled in, scanning their temporary QR codes at the scanner and driving through with quiet acceptance. No honks, no shouts. Just the new rhythm of a neighborhood waking up from a long spell of forced compliance. One SUV pulled up and rolled down its window. A young woman with a toddler in the back smiled and gave me a thumbs up. "Thank you," she said, "for doing something we were all too scared to try." I smiled back. Better late than never. Of course, Karen wasn't finished. She never was. That very night, the security cameras caught her trying to unplug the gate's control panel with a screwdriver and an attitude. She was caught on tape, clumsily pulling wires and swearing like a sailor, only to be interrupted by the floodlights flipping on and the speakers activating with a pre-recorded message. "Smile, you're trespassing on private property." The footage was shared to the community app within minutes. I didn't post it, mind you, someone else did. The comments were glorious. One read, "I haven't laughed this hard since the HOA fined my kid for sidewalk chalk." Another said, "Can we elect Neil as HOA president already?" But that wasn't the plan. I didn't want control over anyone's home. I just wanted peace. And if that meant building a $6,000 monument to boundary enforcement and property rights, so be it. The next phase was already in motion. While Karen plotted her next failed retaliation, I was preparing the biggest reveal of all. Because while she was focused on her clipboard and HOA rulebook, I was quietly rewriting the future of the entire neighborhood, one access permit at a time. The days that followed felt like watching a reality show unfold in real time. Except the drama was on my front lawn, the cast didn't know they were losing, and the audience had started to root for the underdog, me. Since the gate went up, the community had gone into a strange, sort of psychological split. One half grumbled about the inconvenience of permits, and the other half secretly, or not so secretly, celebrated Karen's empire finally toppling under the weight of her own arrogance. And right in the middle of it all, trying to claw back relevance with every breath she took, was Karen, still marching around like a dethroned dictator hoping her loyal subjects might carry her on their shoulders again. Spoiler, they wouldn't. Each day I received more applications. Some residents were clearly annoyed but kept their heads down, understanding it wasn't about oppression, it was about consequence. Others sent apologies along with their forms, admitting they had supported the HOA blindly and now regretted it. A retired veteran named Mr. Caldwell showed up at my door with a batch of homemade muffins and said, "I knew she was crazy when she fined me for having my flag too high, but I didn't know what to do. Thank you for doing something." That meant more than the headlines. But Karen wasn't giving up. She'd always treated the HOA handbook like sacred scripture, and now she was combing through it like a vengeful monk looking for a loophole. She started circulating a petition claiming that I was commercializing community property and using intimidation to restrict mobility. Her language was laughably dramatic, filled with phrases like chokehold on access and tyranny in a tailored suit. The HOA board, now fractured and defensive, tried to hold an emergency meeting. I attended, sitting quietly in the front row with a thick binder filled with legal documents, ownership transfers, and permits signed by the county. When Karen stood to speak, it felt less like a speech and more like a meltdown wrapped in a monologue. "He has manipulated property loopholes to turn this neighborhood into a gated prison," she shouted, slamming her fist on the table for emphasis. "Next, he'll be charging us to breathe." I raised a hand politely and was acknowledged by a very tired-looking interim chairperson. I opened the binder and began reading from the property deed that clearly stated the land parcel, including the road leading into the subdivision, was now owned by my LLC, fully and legally. Karen tried to interrupt, but I held up a document stamped with the county seal. Her mouth shut so fast it made a tiny clicking sound. "I didn't ask for this responsibility," I said, my voice calm and direct. "But I also didn't ask to be blocked from my own home. This started when you illegally obstructed my driveway, mocked me publicly, and refused to listen to reason. Now, I've simply done what you refused to do, read the fine print and act within the law." There was a hush. Then applause. Not thunderous or overly dramatic, but enough to rattle Karen. She stormed out before the vote was even taken. The result? A formal censure of Karen's actions, a motion to audit past HOA spending, and an agreement to pause all citation activity until further notice. For the first time in years, people in the neighborhood smiled when they walked their dogs. Sidewalk conversations returned. Kids started playing chalk hopscotch on driveways without their parents nervously watching for clipboard patrol. But Karen wasn't finished yet. She filed a complaint with the zoning commission, alleging I was running a commercial enterprise out of a residential zone. It was a long shot, and she knew it, but she wasn't playing for victory anymore. She was playing for noise, disruption, anything to slow me down or reclaim a shred of control. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The same neighbors who once whispered complaints behind curtains were now openly sending character statements and legal support to the commission on my behalf. When the zoning officer arrived for an inspection, he found a well-maintained entrance with clear signage, safety protocols, and a digital permit system that had actually improved emergency response times because of the real-time access logs we shared with fire and rescue departments. His official report used the phrase, "Community Enhancing Initiative." It was the final straw for Karen. That evening, she called for a protest at the gate. About a dozen people showed up, mostly her friends from book club and a few fence-sitters who just wanted to feel important again. They held up signs like, "Down with the gate," and "Neighborhoods not toll booths." One woman even brought a whistle and blew it dramatically every time a car drove through peacefully. Meanwhile, residents just waved, scanned their permits, and went on with their day. It was almost sad. Almost. That night, the protest fizzled out by sunset. Karen was the last to leave, standing under the glow of the gate lights like a washed-up stage actor refusing to exit after curtain call. I watched from my porch with a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't gloating. I was just relieved. After everything, being blocked in, humiliated, harassed, I had finally reclaimed something far bigger than a driveway. I had reclaimed the balance, the unspoken agreement of neighborliness that had been shattered by years of power-tripping enforcers and arbitrary rulemaking. The next morning, something wild happened. A cardboard box showed up on my doorstep. No return address. I opened it to find a small wooden gavel and a note that said, "From one rule enforcer to another. Use this one wisely." It was unsigned, but the handwriting looked suspiciously like Mr. Caldwell's. I placed it on my bookshelf as a reminder. Not of power, but of irony. Behind the scenes, I continued preparing the next phase. While Karen was focused on zoning boards and court appeals, I had my team working on converting the permit system into a digital dashboard for residents. They'd be able to manage guest access, set delivery windows, and even vote on community-wide updates through the app. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I was just trying to prove a point, that when the rules are fair, people don't need to fear them. But the funniest part of it all? Karen eventually applied for a permit. Not directly. That would have bruised her pride. No, she did it through a friend, who forgot to hide the metadata on the uploaded driver's license photo. Her face, immortalized in one last act of surrender, popped up in my dashboard with the words, "Permit pending," underneath. I approved it. Instantly. With a smile. Because after everything she did, every fine, every insult, every roadblock, I wasn't interested in keeping her out. I just wanted her to go through the same gate as everyone else. It started with a letter, official-looking, embossed with the county seal, and delivered not to my mailbox, but by a man in a navy windbreaker who knocked on my door at 7:42 in the morning. He was polite, even apologetic, as he handed me the envelope and said, "Zoning review. Just a routine matter, sir." I thanked him, closed the door, and sat down at the kitchen table to read it with a cup of reheated coffee in hand. My eyes scanned the document once, then twice, my brain trying to process what Karen had just pulled. The complaint alleged I was operating an unauthorized commercial toll facility in a residential area and demanded a full review of property use, business licensing, and neighborhood impact. Karen had escalated. Again. But this time, she'd made the fatal mistake of drawing government attention to a matter where I had every single receipt, permit, and legal clearance in order, and more importantly, I had friends in exactly the right places. I called my attorney first, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Erica who had once argued a zoning appeal so well the city offered her a consulting job just to stop her from appealing again. When I explained the situation, she chuckled softly. They picked the wrong target. Again. She immediately filed a response, attaching copies of the land deed, the county's approval for the gate, and letters of commendation from both emergency services and traffic flow consultants. Within 48 hours, the county's zoning department sent back a notice saying the complaint was under review, but no action would be taken without an inspection. I was ready. The inspector showed up 3 days later. A middle-aged man named Pete with a ball cap, clipboard, and a gate that screamed, "I've been doing this job since fax machines were cutting edge." He didn't even make it past the gate before he started chuckling. "This is the place?" he asked, waving his clipboard like a game show prize. "This is the big zoning emergency?" I buzzed him in and gave him the grand tour. I showed him the access permit system, the emergency access overrides, the safety bollards, the clear signage, and the fact that every square inch of the gate stood entirely on my privately owned land. I even showed him the Wi-Fi-enabled guest pass system and the fire department's app integration. He just whistled low and said, "Wish we had this at my HOA. They still use paper tickets and gilt." When he left, I knew what was coming. 3 days later, I received a letter clearing me of any zoning violations, and included with it was a brief report that said, in part, the installation serves a net community benefit and adheres strictly to all code requirements. That same day, I forwarded a digital copy to the HOA board. For good measure, I also printed a copy and hand-delivered it to Karen's door. I didn't say a word. I just rang the bell, smiled, handed her the letter, and walked away before she could open her mouth. She stood frozen, holding the document like it was a court summons for her soul. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The zoning report had sparked something I hadn't expected. When the city officials started combing through documents, they stumbled upon something far more interesting than my gate. They discovered a trail of unauthorized structures and landscaping changes implemented by the HOA itself. Karen's beloved beautification initiative had never been formally approved. The new fencing around the retention pond? Illegal. The surveillance cameras placed on light poles? Installed without permit. The drainage redirection for the ornamental koi pond in front of the clubhouse? A violation of the county's water runoff management laws. Suddenly, the hunter was the hunted. The county opened a formal investigation into the HOA. Multiple fines were assessed, some small, others massive. The board was forced to hire an outside consultant to conduct an audit. And the results weren't pretty. Thousands of dollars had been allocated for consulting fees, maintenance bonuses, and community outreach, none of which had actual receipts. The money trail led in a suspiciously tight circle involving Karen, two of her longtime board allies, and a landscaping company registered to Karen's cousin. When residents found out, they were livid. Not just annoyed, furious. The community message board exploded. One thread alone had over 200 comments. People began demanding accountability, asking why the board had so much unchecked power. A special meeting was called, and this time, it wasn't in the clubhouse. It was at the local library auditorium because so many people planned to attend. I sat in the second row, front and center, sipping lemon water while Karen stood at the podium, trying to explain away a $4,700 consulting retreat at a nearby vineyard. It was strategic planning, she insisted. The room erupted in laughter. Someone shouted, "What were you planning, grape harvesting?" Then came the vote. It was swift. The motion to remove Karen passed with overwhelming support. Her allies followed. A new interim board was appointed, made up of residents who promised transparency, reason, and respect for the actual homeowners. The first thing they did? Rescind every fine Karen had issued in the last 6 months. The second? Offer me the HOA presidency. I declined, of course. I had no desire to hold the leash that choked so many for so long. I just wanted to enjoy my driveway again, without someone deciding my pavers clashed with the local petunias. The next morning, as I walked my dog past the now unlocked HOA office, I noticed something funny. The community sign had been updated. Where it once read Pinewood Estates, a Karen-approved community, someone had peeled off the last part. In its place, taped crudely but boldly, was a handmade sign that said, "Now under new management, Sanity." Karen's fall from power was swift and poetic. Her social circle shrank. Her influence disappeared. And while she still lived in the neighborhood, she did so with a lot more humility and a lot fewer clipboards. The new board asked me to consult on better ways to manage community infrastructure. I offered them the gate system software free of charge, and even waived the monthly fees for all homes on a permanent basis, transferring maintenance rights to a resident-led committee. I didn't need the money. I just wanted the message to land. Leadership isn't about domination. It's about trust. That afternoon, I finally sat on my porch without a single task left hanging over my head. The sun was warm, the breeze light. My dog slept at my feet, and the only sound was the gentle squeak of a child's bike chain down the street. A car passed through the gate smoothly, its permit lighting up green. Everything was working quietly, efficiently, and most importantly, fairly. And somewhere behind a curtain, Karen was probably watching it all unfold, wondering where exactly she lost control. The answer was simple. She lost it the moment she confused power with ownership. Because no one truly owns a community. But I had learned that protecting it? That's a role anyone can step into when enough is enough. The final weeks of the neighborhood's transformation were strangely quiet, almost suspiciously so. For the first time in months, no new violations appeared on anyone's door. No sudden landscaping edits popped up overnight. The HOA clubhouse sat unused, its formerly weekly compliance committee meetings cancelled indefinitely. What had once been the epicenter of Karen's empire now felt like a ghost town. The community itself, however, was coming alive in ways it hadn't in years. People lingered on sidewalks again, shared baked goods without worrying about packaging code violations, and kids played basketball in driveways without being scolded for excessive noise. Even the mailman looked more relaxed, no longer having to dodge HOA patrol cars recording how long trash bins stayed curbside. I knew we had reached a turning point when Mr. Hendricks, the same man who once proudly measured everyone's grass height with a ruler, walked over to me holding 2 cups of coffee and said, "I was wrong. All these years, I thought we needed control to feel safe. But we just needed to feel heard." I took the cup, nodded, and we stood there in silence watching a young couple hang fairy lights on their porch. Not one complaint. Not one citation. Just light, laughter, and peace. The new HOA board stayed true to their word. They launched a full transparency initiative. All finances were posted online. Violations required photo evidence and resident feedback before any action. They even opened up town halls to vote on which rules to retire. The first to go? Restrictions on solar panels, decorative mailboxes, and, my personal favorite, the absurd ban on wind chimes. When the ban was repealed, a few neighbors held what they called the Chime Liberation Barbecue, and the sound of gentle tings and pings filled the evening air like tiny victory bells. I kept a low profile during all this. I had no interest in becoming the face of the community. I didn't need to be in charge, I just needed the madness to stop. My gate system remained in place, but all permit fees were officially waived. The gate now served as a reminder, not a roadblock. Residents were given RFID tags for seamless access, and emergency services were granted permanent open-channel clearance. In fact, the fire chief sent me a thank you note, saying the new access logs had already helped shave precious minutes off their response time. The system had become an improvement, not a punishment. Just like I'd hoped. One Saturday morning, a group of residents showed up at my door holding a plaque. It was handmade from repurposed HOA signs, some of the very same ones Karen used to post about barking dog fines or unauthorized reads. It read, "To Neil, for opening the gate and closing the chapter." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, stunned and awkward, while someone handed me a Sharpie and asked me to autograph it. I laughed and wrote, "Keep it fair," in the corner. That night, they mounted it outside the clubhouse right where Karen used to pin up her weekly compliance calendar. No one missed the irony. And then there was Karen herself, the once undisputed queen of the cul-de-sac, now just another face in the crowd. She kept to herself mostly, rarely attending meetings, never speaking unless asked directly. Rumor had it she tried to move but was turned down by a couple of buyers once they learned about her HOA antics through a viral thread online. One particularly famous clip showed her being confronted at the protest gate, complete with whistle-blowing and red-faced ranting. The comments section was brutal. Still, I never mocked her. I didn't need to. Her actions had done that already. There was no need to dig a deeper hole when someone had already buried themselves with their own shovel. The community began to thrive again. A young woman opened a small community garden in her backyard and invited others to plant with her. Another neighbor started weekly movie nights projected onto his garage door. People brought chairs, snacks, and not a single permit form was filed. The neighborhood became what it always should have been, a place to live, not a place to be monitored. One day, while walking my dog, I passed Karen's house. She was sitting on her porch, alone, reading from what looked like a gardening book. Our eyes met for a moment. She gave a faint nod. I returned it. No words. No apologies. Just the unspoken acknowledgement of a finished war. Maybe even a bit of reluctant respect. Weeks later, I hosted a small gathering. Not a celebration, just a thank you dinner for those who helped steer the community back to sanity. We grilled in the backyard, strung up lights, and someone even brought a cake shaped like the gate. It had a little fondant Karen standing in front of it with a clipboard made of sugar. I laughed harder than I had in a long time. Even Carlos came by, bringing a bottle of wine and a new crazy idea involving a ski lodge HOA he claimed needed rebalancing. I told him I'd retired from HOA revenge. Probably. As the sun dipped and the night settled in, I found myself sitting near the edge of my driveway, drink in hand, dog resting beside me, and laughter echoing from the yard behind me. The gate lights flickered on automatically, casting a soft glow across the entrance. A car rolled through. A sensor beeped quietly. And all was calm. I thought back to that first day, the potted trees, the cones, the smug smirk on Karen's face as she said it wasn't my street. It made me smile now, not out of bitterness, but because of how far things had come. Back then, I didn't want a fight. I just wanted access to my home. But when someone tries to control you under the illusion of rules, and you choose to fight back, not with anger but with strategy, something changes. Not just the outcome, the entire balance of power. And in this case, that balance wasn't just restored. It was rebuilt. The final piece of this strange saga came a few days later when a new welcome sign was installed at the neighborhood entrance. It had been designed by a local artist, funded by the residents. It was modern, sleek, and beautifully understated. At the bottom, etched in clean lettering, was one simple phrase: Pinewood Heights, where everyone has a key. No footnotes, no fine print, just a quiet statement of freedom earned not through fury, but through resilience. And a man who refused to let a blocked driveway stop him from paving a better road for everyone.